Our first speaker this evening, someone that all of you know and know well. He has been the face and the voice of the John Birch Society for many, many years. He's an author. He's published a number of books. He lectures. His video overview of America has probably been seen by, I don't know how many millions, 5, 10, we just don't know. It's made the rounds. It's on YouTube, on a whole variety of different websites. And his understanding and input on these issues have done wonders to educate Americans about the type of government they have, about the nature of their economic system. And we're grateful that he's, with his busy schedule, that he decided to be here and speak for us. So will you please welcome the president of the John Birch Society, Mr. John F. McManus.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. It's good to be back in Texas again. I've been here many times. Some of my friends here in the Lone Star State know that my home is in Massachusetts. I'm in Appleton regularly, but as a result of being from Massachusetts, I'm frequently asked, how is it that I, the president of the John Birch Society, can live in that bastion of liberalism and worse? Who's laughing? Well, my answer is I like to work behind enemy lines. During the afternoon program there, Deborah Medina was talking about Texas being 49th out of 50 in some category that was bad, and I said, Massachusetts has to be the 50th, you know. Tonight I want to give you a brief look at one of the ways the traitors are working to abolish our country's independence on the way to full absorption by the United Nations. I also want to mention that there's a book there out on the book table that some people might be interested in if you haven't already seen it. It's my book about a man that I consider one of the great scoundrels. It's about William Buckley. And I was reminded to mention it because William Buckley was a big supporter of the United Nations, in addition to so many other things. So if you feel like it, stop at the book table out there, and if you want me to put my name in it, I think I can still spell it. So. Now, some would call transferring us to the United Nations via step-by-step program, they would call it progress. They say that merging our nation with Canada and Mexico into the North American Union, and then with all of the nations of the Western Hemisphere, and then with the rest of the world in a new world order under the UN is wise and even necessary. They claim this to be wisdom because of the threat of terrorism or the so-called scourge of global warming or because of some other supposed or real problem that might exist. Right? All this and more, of course, is pure hogwash, right? Not progress. Let's go even further than hogwash and call it treachery of immense proportions, even treason to our nation and the 300 million plus Americans who are citizens here. Now, steps to accomplish bringing about these mergers have been proposed for many years. Many of the interim steps have been thwarted by people like you in this audience who were following the urgings given by the John Birch Society. So whenever part of the plan is exposed, the people behind this treachery change the name of what they're doing. Lately, we go from union, as in North American Union, to integration, or convergence, or community, or even a need for a duplication of the European Union. In April this year, 34 leaders of Western Hemisphere nations met in Cartagena, Colombia, under the banner proclaiming the conference's theme. The theme stated in big, bold letters, "Connecting the Americas, Partners for Prosperity." Doesn't that sound great, right? Conference leaders openly stated that the event's overall goal was to, quote, reach out to the rest of the world with one voice, conveying a message of unity and opportunity. One voice for 34 nations. Sounds almost like world government, doesn't it? A primary topic of discussion was physical integration. They're pretty bold about it. They call their gathering the Summit of the Americas. Meetings such as the one in Colombia last April have been held every third year. They have always had the same theme, uniting all of the nations of the Western Hemisphere. But this type gathering every third year was far from the only event promoting the goal of step-by-step creation of world government. At a similar gathering of the Summit of the Americas in 1994, then-President Bill Clinton signed a document known as the Free Trade Area of the Americas, FTAA. It called for placing all of the nations of the Western Hemisphere, except Cuba, into an economic union. Now, Clinton and all these other people know that an economic union has regularly been followed by political union, but these plotters aren't open about that goal. At least most of them aren't. Yet they point to the European Union as a model without noting that the people of Europe were told that the EU's purpose was merely to spur commerce. And now the European people have found out that their formerly independent nations are locked in both economic and political unions. Anyone who has read any of the European Union's documents also sees the hand of the United Nations. United Nations control of the planet has always been the final goal of the European Union. But Clinton's signature on the Free Trade Area of the Americas in 1994 proved to be too much too soon. The overall goal was being discovered by people across the United States, courtesy of the John Birch Society mostly. So Congress balked. Some members of Congress knew that they'd been snookered into supporting the earlier treaty known as NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA is supposed to be about free trade, but the pact fills 1,700 pages. This is free? If you have free trade, you need 1,700 pages of regulations? Let's stop for a minute and think about our people trading with Canadian people for more than 200 years without NAFTA, right? Who needed NAFTA? We certainly didn't, we who love freedom. The world planners needed it. That's who needed it. They knew that an economic union is always followed by political union, and that's their real goal. But Congress had created NAFTA, and many of our representatives and senators voted for it, thinking that it would increase trade with Canada and Mexico. It didn't increase trade. It decreased employment for Americans. NAFTA not only cost the jobs of 1.8 million Americans, it cut sharply into our nation's manufacturing base. It opened up the borders for illegal immigrants, and it even established judicial panels with power to supersede U.S. law. NAFTA has been a colossal disaster for the best interests of the United States. But NAFTA's on the books. We have to live with that. Bill Clinton left office in 2001. Goodbye, Bill. Replaced by George W. Bush. Now, let me make something completely clear here. We can't blame all that George W. Bush did as president because he spent 2 years in Massachusetts as a student, right? We can't. He's a Texan, isn't he? Somebody told me he was a Texan. 3 months after he entered the White House as our nation's leaders, he pledged to build on NAFTA with the 34-nation free trade area of the Americas, right? So he wants to do what Clinton said he was going to do but never got to it, so Bush announced right away, as soon as he got in the White House, that he was going to go. He was going to accomplish what Clinton failed to get done. He assured all that NAFTA had been beneficial and that he would work to get congressional approval for creating the FTAA's economic union for the whole hemisphere, and he said he'd have it done by 2005. So he had 4 years to work on it. He further stated that all 34 nations would be tied together by the FTAA completely by 2010. But what it didn't happen, again, because the John Birch Society exposed the plot with the distribution of 1 million copies of a special issue of the New American, several pamphlets, some billboards, a DVD entitled Stepping Stone to World Government, the FTAA. Consequently, George W. Bush never even sent his plan to Congress because he knew it wouldn't get anywhere, right? Give yourself a round of applause for that. Let's stop here for a minute and make a point, all right? There are people who like to criticize the John Birch Society or are reluctant to join us because they say, or they don't say but believe, that all we ever do is complain about this or that and we never accomplish anything. Let me say very emphatically that if it had not been for the John Birch Society, the free trade area of the Americas would have become law. Never accomplish anything? Ask George W. Bush, right? Ask the promoters of a constitutional convention if the John Birch Society has ever accomplished anything. We stopped it. Ask the backers of the misnamed and dangerous Equal Rights Amendment if the John Birch Society had ever won a battle. Ask the schemers who've been spreading the plans of the UN's Agenda 21 throughout the nation. Only a few months after our JBS monthly bulletin urged members to start exposing Agenda 21 plans, even the New York Times, in a front-page article, blamed our society for causing problems for the Agenda 21's promoters. Another round of applause. Now, if we had more members and more muscle, we could even persuade Congress to withdraw from the United Nations. We could. So if you're not a member and you're tasting the Birch Society, maybe for the first or second, third time, then what are you waiting for? Organization is essential, and our organization has demonstrated over and over again that we know how to achieve victories, and I've only listed a few. Many of you know about the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderberger Movement, even the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University. Among the numerous other organizations and publications openly or quietly calling for a new world order, we find a group called the World Policy Institute, right? There's dozens of them, as you know, right? There's a fellow with this World Policy Institute named Andrew Redding. Surely without intending to do so, Mr. Redding supplied us with the exact plan of NAFTA and the FTAA. I'm going to quote him, very short quote. He said, NAFTA will signal the formation, however tentatively, of a new political union. Oh, political, he said, right? North America, he calls it. With economic integration will come political integration, which is what I've been saying. By whatever name, this is an incipient form of international government, right? He laid it all out. Following the lead of the Europeans, North Americans should begin considering formation of a continental parliament, right? That's all that one fellow, Andrew Redding. So NAFTA is the formation of a new political unit, and economic integration precedes political integration, which is the beginning of international government, world government. And Americans should do what the Europeans have done with the European Union and form a continental parliament, right? Well, we're happy to report that the European Union is fracturing, right? And it may very well go out of business. I will not lose sleep. All the plans of these New World Order enthusiasts haven't been carried out. George W. Bush, that's the second George Bush, didn't promote the 34-nation FTAA because he knew it wouldn't be approved. Other than his trip to Cartagena and his visits with the leaders of Canada and Mexico at the Security and Prosperity Partnership, that is now the North American Leaders Summit, they changed the name of that too. Obama hasn't even tried to shove the FTAA down our throats, right? He knows it wouldn't fly. He and his handlers know it can't be done. So they have followed the lead started by the George W. Bush administration and called for a North American Union. This is the piecemeal approach. Did you ever stop and think about how do you eat an elephant? Right? You don't eat it in one gulp, right? You eat it one gulp at a time, one little bite at a time. And it would probably take you a year or two to finish, right? So the new plan is to work toward the goal one bite at a time, or piecemeal. That's where the North American Union figures. The largest promoter of this is Robert Pastor, the professor at American University in Washington, D.C. This man has been crusading for trading away U.S. sovereignty for several decades. Our good friend, Dr. Jerome Corsi, has called Pastor the father of the North American Union, and that's accurate. Before he began championing the North American Union, Pastor worked hard on transferring the U.S. Canal in Panama to the Panamanian government of communist Omar Torrijos. He then co-authored a book with Mexican communist George Castañeda. He evidently sees nothing wrong with communism. Pastor then wrote several articles for Foreign Affairs, the Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations. In 2001, he wrote a book entitled Toward a North American Community, calling for merging the military forces of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. See, the piecemeal approach. We'll get the military, then we'll get something else, then we'll get something else, right? And 4 years later, he helped produce the CFR's report entitled Building a North American Community. In 2011, his newest book, The North American Idea, A Vision for a Continental Future, he blames the John Birch Society for blocking the scheme. Another round of applause for you folks. Now, these conspirators, they keep things within the family. Right? Give you an example. Pastor is married to the daughter of former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. Right? Robert McNamara, I think some of you will remember, guaranteed that our forces would lose the Vietnam War. McNamara was a colossal disaster for our country. Right? Now, recently, we found out that Amazon.com is selling 5 books about the North American Union, promoting it. 5 of them. I already mentioned 2 books by Robert Pastor. There's a book by George, I don't know whether it's Jorge or George or what, Dominguez, and Rafael Fernandez de Castro. It's called The United States and Mexico Between Partnership and Conflict. Right? Dominguez just happens to be a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Right? Then there's another book called The Future of North American Integration Beyond NAFTA, right? By Peter Hackham, member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the foreword in the book is by Strobe Talbot, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. This is getting repetitive, isn't it? Right? Then there's the third book, in addition to the 2 by Pastor, Understanding NAFTA, Mexico, Free Trade, and the New North America. And that's written by a fellow named William A. Orme, O-R-M-E. So they're very busy, and their books are very much available. And we intend to do more about this subject of the North American Union because there are some members who think it died and it's gone. No, it's coming back, and it's coming back with a vengeance. It's back on the front burner. As we've already stated, getting the U.S. entangled in its overall plan started with NAFTA. The plan experienced a huge bump in the road when plans to create that 34-nation FTAA were blocked by you. So now the North American Union has been chosen to be the route toward partial, then hemispherical, then worldwide economic and political unions. We've got to stop it. Right? In the end, all nations will be expected to be part of the world government under the United Nations. This must be blocked. That's one of our assignments. And by our, I mean everybody in this room. Right? It's our assignment. Now, in the beginning stages of what became the European Union, its creators formed a subsidiary called the Council of Europe. They issued a poster depicting a rebuilding of the Tower of Babel, right? I have a copy of their poster right here, right? That's pretty bold. They said that they wanted to rebuild the Tower of Babel. That is so significant, so significant. The obvious intention was to counter the very notion of independent nationhood. But why feature the Tower of Babel on a poster? The answer is that nationhood began at the Tower of Babel. When arrogant and prideful men sought to supplant God as their ruler, they built a tower they intended to reach the heavens, but God intervened, didn't he? He confused the tongues, and he effectively divided those people into language groupings that resulted in nations. Nationhood is created by God Almighty and is therefore a good. Doing away with nationhood is just the opposite, not good. Destruction of national independence and the creation of one world rule is the opposite of what God established. God doesn't want us to have a world government, and you can get that very clearly. Just go back and look at the Tower of Babel and your Bible. Sometimes we run into people who don't want to spend their time and effort in John Birch Society because they claim that they want to be working in religious pursuits. The John Birch Society is not a religion, but combating the drive toward the destruction of nationhood and effectively building a new Tower of Babel called the United Nations is not only a political and economic battle, it's a battle for God versus God's enemies and our enemies. A battle for right versus wrong, a battle against a satanic and diabolically driven conspiracy, all aimed at mankind. The more people understand that, the more who will join us to preserve our country and to help bring about less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Creation of the North American Union must be blocked. Steady pressure to get us out of the United Nations must continue. And let's not forget to pray. Right? I probably don't have to tell that to many of you in this audience. But let's not just pray. I recommend the admonition of the great St. Augustine, one of my heroes. He said, pray as if it all depends on God and work as if it all depends on yourself and do them at the same time. That's what we recommend. If you're not a member, why not? Join the John Birch Society and help us to bring about that era of less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Thank you.